Welcome to the Buzz Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Mosquito.
And I'm Maureen.
The Buzz Podcast is where business, technology, and innovation collide. It's where we deep dive into candid conversations with leaders who are pushing the boundaries in healthcare, technology, and beyond.
It's also where you're going to hear industry experts who are rewriting the rules, and in some cases, they're breaking them. So don't forget to join us for each new episode and like and subscribe to the Buzz Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Buzz, your go-to podcast for all things innovation, emerging technology, and healthcare. I'm your host, Mike Mosquito, and with me today, my brilliant co-host, Maureen. How you doing, Maureen?
I am awesome, Mike. Thank you so much. And I am so ready to have some fun today. There is going to be an exciting topic we are covering, but it's also a really important discussion too.
Well, absolutely. And today I want you to know cyber resilience, cybersecurity, these are on top of everyone's mind. This industry is fraught with those attackers are always coming at our healthcare systems, and we've seen some very large attacks this year. So this crucial topic hits at the right time, but we've got a very special guest joining us today, a wonderful dear friend of mine, Heather Costa. She's an industry expert on cybersecurity and resiliency. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Mike and Maureen. So great to be here with you. Great, and looking forward to the conversation. Always good to see you.
Thank you very much for joining us. So, Heather, let's kick this thing off. Let's set the stage for cyber resilience. It's more than just cybersecurity. Can you break down for us and our listeners what exactly do we mean when we talk about cyber resilience, especially around the context of healthcare? What do you do on your day-to-day, and how should others pay attention in their environments for cyber resiliency?
Great question. So, a couple of things. One, I think in terms of not just cyber resilience, but resilience as a whole. I am the Director of Technology Resilience at the Mayo Clinic, and that title is very intentional. And that what we're looking at is the ability to respond and recover effectively when there is any type of technology disruption. What we know is that the threat landscape today is fraught with cyber attacks. We're seeing ransomware and many other data exfiltration and other things happening across the industry, not just in healthcare, but across the environment as a whole. But healthcare is certainly a big target for a lot of these adversaries right now. So that is top of mind for us. And that is the clear and present danger that we focus a lot on. I often say that I'd rather be hit by a meteor at the data center than a cyber attack, because one is easier to recover from than the other. So if we solve for the hard stuff, if we do the cyber resilience well, it will serve us in other types of disruption. And I think that that's the key, is really this idea that we're trying to build an architect a technology environment that allows us to respond and recover and is scalable regardless of the type of disruption or scale or scope of that disruption.
Yeah. I love that. Not the meteor reference, because that sounds awful. But what I love is how these two things just complement each other then. So the cybersecurity and the cyber resiliency are two different conversations, but you really do need to have both. So I want you to tell our listeners really why it's so critical just to have these frequent conversations around cyber resiliency. Is it because we're seeing more attacks? Is it because they're more sophisticated, or is there something else that seems to be driving why we need to be upping our game?
Yes, and I think it's all of those things, right? So, and that's one of the reasons why we focus on resiliency as a whole. There are disruptions that happen every day. If I had told you 5 years ago that we would be post-pandemic and there would have been millions impacted by that, through death and illness and various other things, not to mention the families and the lasting impacts of that, you might not have believed me. I can't predict the things that are going to come. What I can do is be prepared to respond and recover from them as effectively as possible. So we really operate in a when, not if. And this is a big variation from typical cybersecurity, from the standpoint of most of cybersecurity is focused on stopping the bad thing from happening. Right. And while that is a critical part of it and an important piece, there are going to be things that happen. And so what we have to do is be able to mitigate the impacts when things happen. And that really becomes the resiliency conversation. How are we mitigating the impacts? We know that things are coming. Our measure of success is not in did we stop it, but rather did we mitigate the impacts? Did our caregivers, did our patients feel the impact of this thing? Or were we able to continue on with one foot in front of the other and get done the things that we needed to do, which is the critical and important work of caring for our patients?
So as we talk about patient care, let's deep dive into strategies and what are key components. You're the director of resiliency at Mayo Clinic. You've got patients all over the place. Let's talk about that strategy for Mayo and what should organizations focus on as you're growing that platform and that program for Mayo.
So it's really a new approach. It's a new approach for Mayo. It's a new approach for a departure from traditional disaster recovery in general. Disaster recovery has historically, for the last few decades, we spent time convincing people that there needed to be a plan for that smoking hole in the ground, right? An all or nothing approach, and we needed to be able to fail over to another location. And that has served well in a lot of situations, particularly as it relates to physical disruption. It does not address cyber disruption. As we know with cyber disruption, the biggest thing is that, one, you can't trust anything. If I have a flood, I can trust my backups that were saved somewhere else. If I have a cyber incident, I can't trust my backups. I can't trust anything. So it requires a different type of response, a different strategy for response. Additionally, with a flood, when the flood stops, the flood stops. You don't have that continued threat that's pursuing you while you're working to recover your environment. And I think that those are fundamental differences in how you approach this work and why I say it's easier to recover from a meteor strike than it is a cyber attack. Right? So you're looking at containment and eradication. I need the bad guys not to be in my network trying to undo the things that I'm trying to do while I'm trying to do them. So we've got that piece of it that we have to deal with. And then we've got, I can't trust anything. The backups may be infected. They may be deleted, corrupted in some way. How do I validate that, just the CIA, that I've got confidentiality and integrity and availability of that data and of those backups? So there's a lot of questions to answer in this work that just we haven't had to answer before. The variation in the threat landscape has forced us to have different conversations. So resilience looks different. It's not disaster recovery, it's technology resilience intentionally. And I think that the strategy is that it's a game of increments. We won't be perfect. I can't put together a plan and put it forward even at Mayo and say, here it is, and it's all going to be perfect, and we're going to not have any impact for this disruption. We know that there will be impact. And again, we're looking at what we can do to make it less bad. And that's really, as simple as that sounds, that's the measure of success, and to be incrementally better. So I have to be better tomorrow than I am today. I don't have to be perfect, but I got to get started. And I think that's the message for all healthcare organizations, regardless of size, scale, and scope of the organization, right? Get started. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other and be on that journey to make it better.
I'm going to piggyback on that real quick, Heather. As you know, the buzz is all about trying to throw a little bit out there to get a provocative story out of our listeners. And for our listeners, do you know that these attacks are coming? It's not if, it's when. So with your CIA in place, you're in that circle of trust with the other CISOs around and resiliency around our healthcare systems. Do you feel that our hospitals are doing what they need to protect themselves, or are the hackers just that good?
I think that you just want to poke the bear.
Welcome to the buzz.
I think we have a lot of work to do. To be quite frank, I think both things are true. We've seen this rise of ransomware as a service. It is a commodity at this point, and they're getting better at it, which means we have to be even better.
Right.
Healthcare is sort of immature in the journey when we think about cybersecurity as a whole, right? It's just not something that has been top of mind in healthcare for as many years as it has been in other verticals. So we're playing a little bit of catch up there, I think. In general, in the United States, it has not been as prevalent a topic for as long of a time as it has been in other countries. So we're battling against that, just the newness of cybersecurity and the cybersecurity conversation, and we're trying to play catch up against nation states that have been doing this for longer. So I think it's a combination of both. I don't think there's any shortage of reason and rationale for why we are faced with the challenges that we're faced with. But at the end of the day, we just have to start somewhere and keep going.
Yeah. And you said that it's simple, but I don't really hear anything simple in this entire conversation. I think it's all a bunch of hard truths up against a hard wall. And healthcare, I love what you said that, healthcare has a little bit of momentum that it needs to catch up with. And the healthcare in general, it's a business of people. So I want to just reframe this next question. Let's talk about the people, because at the end of the day, people can introduce or herd off any particular attack. And so, a lot of it comes down to training, and organizations have training, big organizations have training, little organizations have training, and there's varying degrees of what that training looks like. And I'm going to ask you the same question that we ended up posing to another one of our guests that really focused on cybersecurity. And that is, how good of a job are we actually doing with training? And so another one where I'm poking the bear a little bit, but if you could be honest and just say, are we doing a great job? And if we are, let's talk about those things we need to keep doing. And if we are really laggard in something, let's call this out and be honest about what we need to be doing different.
So I think we need to be super intentional about the training that we're doing, why we're doing it, and what we want to accomplish. All too often, we end up in situations where we are checking a box for the sake of checking a box, and there is little that I have adverse reaction to more so than that. I'm a firm believer that we have to have a very clear destination. We need to understand where we're going. What is our desired end state? And then we need to make sure that everything that we're doing, we need to start with that end in mind and work backwards. And everything that we're doing needs to get us closer to that. Will we ever arrive at that perfect sort of utopian end state? Maybe not. And that's okay. But that has to be the guiding principle. We have to stay centered on the why. And when we don't do that, then we end up checking boxes for the sake of checking boxes. And training and awareness is a very good example of that, I think, in a lot of cases, where we're doing phishing tests and we do the annual security video that everyone watches and clicks that, the attestation at the end saying that they've done it. But what have we actually accomplished? And I think part of that question gets answered in measurements, right? So what are we measuring? Do we have a metric around this? What are we trying to accomplish? And then how are we making sure that we are in fact getting there? And if not, what are we doing to adjust our course effectively? Mm-hmm. And I think those are the more challenging conversations, conversations about that human risk management that have to be backed up with metrics and key performance indicators and those sorts of things. At the end of the day, you got to put your money where your mouth is, and it's not enough just to do it to say you've done it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, you talk about the process of resiliency that's required from the people, the infrastructure, but there's technology layered under that to support that. And there are lots of vendors in this space that have technology to protect you, to remediate, to help you. That technology, they come with those tools, tips, and tricks, but those technologies are essential to building your program. And have you found that you have to vet a cybersecurity company even more than you would some other systems? And then how do you go about doing that at Mayo? Because, again, you're a large institution. You're a large institution that has reach and arms, whether it's from innovation, to clinical care and trials and treatment. What do you, as the director over this department, what do you look for in a tool that will help you say they've got something better than the last guys I saw, or I went to the conference this year and this is new and I probably want to share this with someone else?
So I think, so I'm going to pull that apart. I think there's a couple of things there. We should vet every technology with rigor. And I think from a technology resiliency perspective, that's critically important. If we start having the resiliency conversation in planning phase, right? If you think about plan, build, run, we need to be having those conversations as part of the planning phase so that they're baked in and not a bolt-on at the end of the conversation. That changes everything. Whether it's a cybersecurity company or a cybersecurity tool, or whether it's some other technology that you're bringing into the environment, or even not a technology that you're bringing into the environment, but a vendor that you rely on, goods and services, Interchange Health, we have to vet those organizations extensively at the same level of rigor because they will impact us similarly. It doesn't have to be a cybersecurity tool that gets breached, right? In fact, most times it's not going to be, it's going to be something else.
Right.
And there's so much that we don't directly control that's not about what we've done in our environment, but rather where we are attached to other environments and other companies, third and fourth party vendors. So it really has to be this comprehensive conversation around all of those things. When we think about people and process, for me, that's foundational. That becomes the bedrock of the program. And then we find the right technologies to layer on top of that. The right technologies for Mayo may not be the right technologies for this hospital or that hospital or this bank or other organizations. And so I don't think that there's a single answer around a technology that is the right technology to support resiliency for healthcare or in varied organizations. It's going to depend on the programmatic components, the people, the process, what the technical architecture looks like, the technology architecture looks like inside of that organization. And if it doesn't work for your organization, then it doesn't work. It doesn't matter how great it is. It doesn't matter if it's the new biggest thing. And technology won't fix anything if the process is broken. If you don't have the right leadership in place and those foundational things there programmatically, then it doesn't matter what technology you bring in. It could be the very best in class by miles, and it still won't fix anything. So I think those are the questions you have to answer first. What are we trying to do? Again, keeping the why at the center. The why doesn't change. The how will. We see that. Right? If you know what your purpose is, what is the mission? What are we trying to accomplish? Where are we trying to go? That should be constant. What changes is how you arrive there, because the technology will change, the threat landscape will change, the organization will change some of its components. But if you're central on your why, then you adjust with it and arrive there effectively. And I think that that's really the key to finding the right resources to get the job done effectively. And it's organizationally dependent.
In that how, let me ask you this. I dropped this on a group not too long ago. Are you at the point in your organization that you're going back to all of your partners and vendors in the enterprise and evaluating their business associate agreements and looking at, are they doing what they need to do to protect your environment as well? Because again, as you said, it may not be something that's happening on your systems. It may be what you're attached to in someone else's that allows that door to be open and to remain open for a bad actor. Are you at that point?
Well, that's an interesting point, and it's true. So one of the things we hear, just in the industry in general, not just healthcare, but I hear it in healthcare, and obviously that's the circle I am primarily running through. What's in the cloud, so we don't have to worry about it.
Yes.
Right?
It's in the cloud. They can't get to it.
It's SaaS. It's a SaaS-based tool. So it's good. We're covered because that's a SaaS-based tool. And that's been a conversation that even prior to coming to Mayo that I had in previous organizations, that just because it's SaaS-based doesn't mean we have any less responsibility. At the end of the day, our patients don't care that it's a SaaS-based tool. What they're concerned about and what's important to them is how it impacts them. It's the old adage, what have you done for me lately, right? So that's the question that we have to answer, and we always have to be responsible for that. And I think that we bear a responsibility, it's duty of care, to make sure that any organization that we are partnering with is held to that same standard, and we are the ones that have to hold them to account. At the same time, thinking in terms of just stark resilience, business resilience, operational resilience, technology resilience, business continuity, we've got to have an internal plan for what we do when that partner doesn't deliver, whatever that looks like. When we saw the issue happen with the bad update, there were a lot of organizations that were impacted to the point that they couldn't do business. That to me means they didn't have a resiliency plan.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a resiliency plan, it shouldn't matter what disrupts you. You have a pathway, you've got a map. You at least have a high level idea of here's what we can do to fill that gap if this thing that we normally rely on isn't there. And that's true whether it's technology, whether it's vendors, whether it's people, or if it's interdepartmental dependencies. So the dependencies are key, understanding what they are, the importance of them, and knowing these are the things that at a minimum we have to continue doing no matter what. And here's a pathway to continue doing them. And it won't be a one-for-one replacement. It won't be that we have, I don't just have technology sitting in a closet that can replace the technology that's been hit by a cyber attack. That's not a thing. And it's not going to be efficient. We're going to lose efficiency. It's not going to be exactly the same. But the point is to mitigate the impact.
Yeah.
I love that. Maureen, you were having a question, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm just sitting here and I'm thinking, Heather, I love how you always bring it back to the patient, that's your center of focus. I think when you had previously chatted with us, I loved your example of keeping grandma alive. And so I want to just switch gears a little bit though. We're going to keep grandma alive in our minds, but I want to use real world examples too. So are there any studies or a specific example where cyber resilience has really worked well? Because that's an opportunity to learn.
So I think we see it. I think we've seen it in. Well, here's the tricky thing about cyber resilience. If you think back to Y2K, we're gonna go way back machine. We think back to Y2K. There are a lot of people who feel like there was all the hype and nothing happened, right?
Yeah.
We got to the year 2000 and all of the things that were supposed to suddenly be broken weren't broken, and everyone's like, oh, it was just a bunch of hype. Mm-hmm. That, my friend, is resilience. They did the work. They did the things that needed to be done to mitigate the impact so that the impacts weren't felt, they weren't seen.
Yeah.
And that resilience is a funny thing because it almost is invisible. If you're doing it right, it's invisible. It's not that those things wouldn't have happened. They didn't because we'd done the work. We'd done the planning. We'd done the recoding in some of the technologies. We've done those things effectively. Same thing happens from a cyber resiliency perspective. You're not going to have a study necessarily that says, oh, well, this demonstrates how the cyber resilience worked. What you will have is an organization that had less impact, that their patients didn't know they'd been attacked by a ransomware attack. It was mitigated to the point of which it wasn't felt by the caregivers and the patients. That's when you know that the resilience is effective and it's working. Or things didn't go down because you had an alternate pathway and plan for something. Or if it went down, it was restored very quickly because you had a plan in place and a pathway in order to get there. So I don't know that there's studies on that. There certainly are studies around the impacts of cyber attacks, particularly on healthcare. That in and of itself, the study around that is relatively limited. and new. It's hard to point specifically to the patient care impacts. There are researchers out of University of Minnesota who have put together some research around that and what the impacts are looking like. We know that there are regional impacts. One hospital doesn't experience a cyber ransomware attack. All of the neighboring hospitals that have to take the overflow and the diversions and all of that, they feel it too. So we see those things, and that's where, again, resilience comes into play, because if I'm one of the neighboring hospitals, I need to be able to receive those patients effectively. I need to have a plan of action where I'm not plugging in somebody's USB that they arrived with from that hospital that was impacted into our computer systems. Right? So there are a lot of things like that I don't know that you can say there's a study and we can point to this thing or that thing, but we know it and we see it. We see it when there are wide-scale disruptions like what we saw with Change. There were some healthcare organizations that handled it better than others based on having some of that planning and resilience in place. Some of them had, if they didn't already, they were able to quickly turn around and get MOUs in place with other organizations to fill that gap that Change could not fill, to do that processing. We saw it with the issue with CrowdStrike, right? We had, again, some companies that were paralyzed by it and others that continued to work, healthcare organizations too, where some were paralyzed by it, others continued to work as though it's just another day. There's always going to be disruption.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why we at Mayo did the departure from disaster recovery, which again is that all or nothing, smoking hole in the ground approach, to the idea of technology resilience, because it's agile and it can serve us and it's scalable. Mm-hmm. If we're looking at things at that sort of more granular level, then we've got the ability to pivot when it's a small disruption. We've got the ability to recover this one area of the environment, this application or this system, as opposed to, oh, we got to fail it all over the whole thing, and it's going to take us 2 weeks to do that because we had this small disruption. So that it really becomes a balancing act.
And the balance of, and Y2K is such a perfect example where I almost feel like people said, see, it was just such a hype. There was never a problem. They don't see all of the behind the scene activities that occurred to get there. And let's be honest, there are some that just totally put their head in the sands and said, yeah, we'll just see what happens, and we'll ride it out, whatever. So my next thought was, what do you do with those organizations that are making those mistakes, whether they're small mistakes or they're big mistakes? What are the things that they need to be saying, listen, this is a no-go. We have to make sure we're not doing X. What is X in your mind?
Well, again, I think it starts with understanding the environment. What are we doing? What are the most important things? Mm-hmm. And starting there. You have to start. And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money to start, right? So it's easy for Mayo to say, oh, we'll just do all of the things. And everyone's going, well, Mayo's this huge organization that's well-funded, and we don't have funding like that, or we don't have staff like that. I don't have a technology resilience director here at my small hospital. And you don't have to. And in a lot of organizations, they don't. And in a lot of organizations, it becomes other duties as assigned. But making someone accountable or a group accountable, I think is a good step. Making sure you have a clear understanding of, again, what is important and why, and what are the things that we can do. And understand that you don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to get started.
Yeah.
And be on that path of continuous improvement.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. Heather, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. This has been an awesome, incredible, and informative session that we've had with you today. This discussion should help our listeners understand more of what it takes to build and manage a cyber resilience program in healthcare. I really thank you for doing that for us today. So thank you for being on the Buzz.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Agree. And to all of our listeners, please stay tuned for more episodes, because we're going to continue to explore this topic around the intersection of technology, innovation, and healthcare.
All right, folks, that's it for today. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this segment, Panda Health, Elite Groups, and Natera. Thank you very much for listening today. Keep buzzing and stay resilient. Thank you.